The great storytellers of our time are constantly coming up with more sophisticated ways to show and tell us new kinds of stories. Stories that entertain us while usually teaching us some kind of lesson. With great responsibility comes great power. But I think the only thing better than showing or telling a story is having your audience play it. You can have your audience see how bad or good a situation is, but what about when you can make your audience experience being in that situation instead? This is why I believe that video games are the most potent and powerful narrative tool in human existence, when used effectively. At least until Elon Musk finishes building the Animus. A lot of people, when reflecting on The Last of Us, explain that one reason the first game was so successful was that it actually made you feel like you were a father protecting your daughter, and how little you would hesitate to do very bad things to keep her safe. And sure, there's been movies in the past that have a very similar thing going on, and a lot of video games narratives have already been translated to the big screen. But what about the great narratives that can only be portrayed through video games? A movie screen could never capture the sense of discovery from games like The Outer Wilds, or making a new best friend that you can actually bounce ideas off of like you do in Disco Elysium, or even the feeling of accomplishment you get when you slam dunk an interrogation in LA Noire with only 4 restarts. It doesn't happen as much as I like, but every so often, a game comes out, usually by an indie developer, that hits real hard because it isn't held back by a giant publisher who market tests the game into oblivion. Return of the Obra Dinn, What Remains of Edith Finch, and Gone Home come to mind first. But there is a new game that you need to add to that list if you're a fan of any of the games I've mentioned. A game that went from being a Skyrim mod made by an Australian lawyer in his free time to a standalone game that is currently being nominated for Game of the Year at the upcoming BAFTA Awards ceremony. I am talking about The Forgotten City, a narrative-heavy mystery game that takes place in a hidden city full of golden statues that all look like they are in fear or pain. When you first lay eyes on the city, you will have nothing but questions. And that's kind of the point. To be honest, the more you know about the game, the more it diminishes your experience going in. So that's why I'm going to speak about the more broad things I like first, while diving into the more specific and spoiler-filled stuff that I liked later in the video. My ultimate goal is that if you haven't already closed the video around halfway and exclaimed, "Wow, how have I not played this yet?" then maybe you will by the end of it. If you already plan on playing The Forgotten City but haven't yet, then get out of here. Yeah, that's right. I'm talking, you. Yes, you. Don't point back at me. You. Yes, you. Get out. Go on. The focus of the gameplay isn't on action or even the normal mystery game stuff you'd expect, like crime scene investigation. It's mostly talking to people. All of the characters have fleshed out personalities and backstories. There's not that many of them, but that's because the hidden city isn't very big. During the first hour or so, I would feel lost most of the time, and the city felt a lot bigger than it really was. But eventually, the next problem I had was that every time I spoke to someone, they would either be so interesting that I would exhaust every dialogue option I could, or they would give me some piece of information that brought me closer to solving one of the Forgotten City's many secrets. You like men? What?
What's wrong with you?
You like men?
Go straight to the magistrate. I found him!
As you may have noticed, this city is distinctly Roman, and to that end, the developers have spent a lot of time with a historian and an archaeologist to make sure the game was as historically accurate as possible. I got to learn a lot of things about Roman history that I had no idea of, like the act of decimation, which is where 1 in every 10 people is killed as a punishment to a larger group, the many suffering for the sins of the few. And when one of the game's characters first explained to me this concept, I told him I thought it was abhorrent. But one of the most interesting aspects of the Forgotten City is that these well fleshed out characters will stand up for themselves philosophically when you try to hold them to your morals. These characters aren't meant to be virtual target practice dummies here to make you feel superior to them. These are adults that have a reason for feeling the way that they do that completely makes sense. Like, why would Romans think that Christians are cultists?
You mean the blasphemous cult responsible for burning down half of Rome last year? It's hard to blame the people for being angry about that.
As I said earlier, the Forgotten City was originally a Skyrim mod that was very popular. The story of Nick Pierce turning his hobby of modding Skyrim into his very own development studio called Modern Storyteller is both fascinating and inspiring. You can find it on one of the best channels on YouTube for gaming called NoClip. I'll throw a link in the description because that video does an amazing job of explaining the risks that Nick had to take. He walked away from being a lawyer, which you really can't just start and stop whenever you want, while deciding to put all of his life savings into following his dream of running his own game studio. And somehow it worked. So you know there's some kind of mystery going on in some kind of mysterious Roman town. But why are you there? The game starts with you being saved from a river that you were drifting down unconscious by a woman named Karen. This is a game about a Roman city, but right now it's clearly modern times. She tells you that you're both in the middle of Italy, and she's here looking for her friend named Al. You get to pick from 4 cool backstories, but other than that, you're basically an amnesiac protagonist. You tell Karen that you'll go look for her friend Al so that all of you can go find help. She points to a mysterious temple and says she'll wait out here while you go in there. When you wander inside, you fall through a trapdoor into a giant pool of water, no way back. Once you wander in a little further, you make your first friend, Galerius. He asks you where you came from, and as you answer and exchange questions with each other, it becomes clear to you that somehow you've teleported back to Roman times. Galerius tells you that now that you're here, you need to speak to the leader of the Golden City named Sintius. He'll explain everything. Galerius guides you and gives you a little tour of the hidden city on the way there. You meet Sintius and have a potentially very long conversation, where Sintius explains to you that this Golden City is some kind of strange paradise. You can't leave, but all of your basic needs are met. They don't know how they got there, but they've been able to gather clues strewn about the city, letters and notes left behind by these golden statues while they were alive. From what Sintius can tell, some kind of disaster has come multiple times to this city. Golden statues from many different generations show that. Many of the documents left behind speak of something called a golden rule. Apparently, if anyone in the city commits a sin, then this strange disaster will come, punishing the many for the sins of the few. The reason that you're there is to stop that from happening. Somebody has summoned you here, and Sintius now tasks you with figuring out who is going to break the golden rule and stopping it from happening. Sintius gives you free rein to talk to anyone and go in anyone's house. But what exactly is a sin? As you talk to the various people in the city, you find that there's a lot of bad behavior going on. The citizens trick one another to take their money, enslave them in debt, and even push them to suicide. All of this is going on, but it's clear that the golden rule is not being violated. I saw all of this going on, and I thought, well, why don't I steal this guy's money that's just sitting in this chest over here while no one's looking? As soon as I did that, a great voice bellowed throughout the city,
"The many shall suffer for the sins of the few."
The citizens all started freaking out. I recalled earlier that Cynthius explained that there's some kind of time portal that he can open for you in case the golden rule is violated. So me and Cynthius start running to the edge of town where I started. He opens a portal and is melted to bones right in front of me, and I run inside. All of a sudden, I'm standing back where I was when I first entered the city, and I am greeted by Galerius with the same conversation we had before. That's right, it's a time loop game. Have you ever wondered what it would be like if Groundhog Day took place in ancient Rome? Of course not. That's what makes this so original. The more times you go back, the better you understand the city's people and the routines, which will be required to see the end of this fantastic story. The story is dramatic, with a surprising amount of humor in it. Anyone who considers themselves a mystery fan or a history buff should put the Forgotten City on their must-play list. After all, the game does not overstay its welcome, clocking in around 5 to 7 hours. Nick Pierce's story is living proof that anyone can have an idea that's so good they can turn it into a successful video game. I can't wait to see what modern storyteller comes up with next. But until then, I refuse to stop standing the Forgotten City. Oh, and don't forget, you can also use a zip line. Thanks for watching.